Chapter 1. The Three Bankers. The autumn frost was setting in. The bells in Saragossa Cathedral tolled a soft echo through the morning mist. As the centre of Christian power in eastern Spain, Saragossa was the staging ground of the Inquisition. Everywhere madness sang, and sorrow was its tune. A frigid breeze poured into a dark prison cell where sat a man richly clothed. He was of some importance in that country and was a handsome gentleman. He was normally honed with a fair ivory complexion, though the Spanish sun had tanned his skin. His hair was short and black, and his face barren of blemish, though vivid with the shadow of darkened whiskers mingled with faint streaks of silver. He was a stern man who harboured many dark memories. He sat in silence with a busy mind, tapping his finger upon the table in front of him, where was set a fresh piece of parchment, along with a quill and some ink. The cell door cranked open. In walked the warden with 2 armed guards, and towered over him, though he paid them no mind. "'Tis day 39, senor," spoke the warden. "Your time is running out. Tomorrow morning you will be put to the rack for interrogation. You will then burn if you are lucky, but if justice is to be served, you will be beheaded and have your limbs ripped off and hanged in the streets. I suggest you pen that confession unless you want to suffer a terrible death for your despicable crime." The man made no response, but remained deep in thought. The warden did not expect an answer, but only wanted to instill in his mind the possible horror that awaited him, and so turned out of the cell and went away. Silence rang once more. The words of the warden ran round and round through the man's head. He lifted his tired arm and reached for the quill. He drained off the excess ink and brought it over to the parchment to write down a confession. In the very act, his hand stalled, and his mind drifted off to the life that was now behind him, both the good and the bad. He massaged the quill in his fingers for a while, hesitating on the wisdom of this decision. He at length reached back over to the inkpot and deposited the quill. In old Christian theology, there was a peculiar belief pertaining to a rose. It was said to be a holy flower which harboured a sacred connection with Jesus Christ and the martyred apostles, and was the chosen emblem of the Virgin Mary from which came the Holy Rosary. All throughout the ages of Anno Domini, many saints and distressed Christians, forlorn under the shadow of despair, were said to have witnessed the mysterious presence of a rose nearby, which was a sign that heaven had come to bear away their anguish and comfort their souls with love, or reclaim them from an ignoble life. Micheletto d'Angelo was the name of this particular fellow, and he was one of few who had crossed paths with the divine rose. Some called him a saint, others called him a conniving opportunist. You may judge for yourself. The man was not Spanish, but was born in Florence, Italy, in the year 1440 to Carlo d'Angelo and Marisa Tenorsa. The D'Angelos were commonly in business with Venetian glassblowers from Murano. Carlo, his father, had founded his knowledge of enterprise in this trade before seeking mightier advantages upon the seas, operating in fish marketing, and signing on to merchant ventures throughout the Mediterranean. Marisa was a peculiar woman. Before her marriage to Carlo, she had made vows to become a nun, but her attraction to the burly, dark-haired sailor could not be confided. In her heart, she would always stress this decision to have been a potential sin, for which she felt ever compelled to give her devotion and resources to the Church of San Di Lorenzo. Such excessive charity evoked the wrath of Carlo, who was always scrounging to save a coin. Micheletto's childhood was structured upon his mother's behaviour. He would venture alongside her, inhaling her charity, as they wandered through the streets of Florence, distributing bread to paupers and lowly tithes to prelates. She always gave without asking and without telling her husband. Upon the grandiose site of Brunelleschi's construction of the giant dome atop the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, Micheletto learned to dream. He revered the unconventional artist as the master of dreamers. His young life was given meaning through his passion for art. He earnestly pursued this course, continuing his observation of the masters and acting as the apprentice to a local wood and stone carver, hoping one day to find himself on the doorstep of the Medici Academy, sharing company with the greatest minds of the 15th century. Though the vicissitudes of life were always unpredictable, giving and taking in cruel force, Micheletto's dreams were met with quick disaster when his saintly mother, Marisa, succumbed to malaria and died, altering a new course of life for the shattered adolescent. He was taken under the wing of his distant father, Carlo, who had given the boy a life of shallow opportunity on the high seas. A simple principle to mind was ingrained in him as a seaman, which Carlo presented in his impudent coldness. Even a monk whose righteousness surpasses all would just as soon die upon the seas should he fail to realize that the meridians and parallels are made of blood. Even as a ship's boy, Micheletto would have to acquire the skills necessary to do battle with potential pirates or mutineers. Such skills would prove useful for just such an incident. After a mere 6 years of ship-rigging and bitter disputes with his father, Micheletto would again shape himself anew when Carlo's ship, the San Andrea, came under attack by a coalition of Catalan and Croat pirates in the Gulf of Gabes near Tunisia. A brief but bloody battle ensued. The pirates easily outmatched the merchants armed with harquebuses and Mamluk sabres. When massacre was inevitable, Carlo grabbed hold of Micheletto and threw him overboard into the deep and exclaimed to the young lad, "How far would you swim for rebirth?" Micheletto took these words to heart and was left adrift for many days, prey to the serpents of the sea and the fiery gaze of the sun, which beat upon the tides like the flames of the inferno. He would never see his father again. As fate would have it, he at last found soft wet sand sinking between his fingers off the coast of Cazola, one of the Narentine Islands, which was home to the fierce pagan pirates of antiquity who once plagued the Adriatic. There he would labour in the shipyards before finally building for himself a long-lasting career as a merchant banker, which first took root when he started purchasing shipping bonds on merchant vessels until he befriended bankers from Perinaldo and became one himself. From then on, as he began to master the trade, he expanded his enterprise from the purchase of shipping bonds to the purchase of bills of exchange. Eventually, Micheletto's bank became so wealthy that they were financing entire voyages, some for the purpose of honest trade, others for privateering exploits. In the year 1476, he ended up, like all businessmen of the time, in the Republic of Venice. Though currently her maritime borders were falling apart in the fearful wake of the Turkish onslaught. The Turks, many years previous, had shocked the Western world with the capture of Constantinople in 1453, which had beforehand served as a vital crossroads for trade and was the last centre of Christian power in the East. Venice had held valuable business ties with the city and was now a desired target of the Sultan. If good fortune were to afford him victory, the Turkish Empire would dominate the Mediterranean as well as all trade and commerce with the Levant and Asia. Venice's commercial empire was falling apart piece by piece to the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. She was now receiving an influx of merchants and bankers seeking to protect their enterprise. Some came to collect their bonds and claim the dividend from their investments, which the bankrupt republic was struggling to deliver, while others sought less drastic alternatives but came in hopes of securing their interests in the crumbling industry. San Marco loomed with this uproar. The merchant lords were assembled in court order, arrayed in their brown, red, and black giorneas and doublets, with fur-trimmed coats and cloaks, and upon their heads they wore expensive hats ringed with ruffled brims. They raised their voices before the Doge and his tribunals, who were assembled in their scarlet mantles and official cornos, basking in the comfort of St. Mark's Basilica. The floor of the spacious hall where they were gathered was of marble, which extended up to the lower registers of the walls. Polychrome marble pillars flanked the hall and supported various archways of golden glass tesserae, which emitted the picturesque stories on a myriad of mosaics. Mass had been conducted prior to the Concilio Grande in order to obtain God's will upon the assembly and give them wisdom in their decisions. In defense of their commercial shares, the patricians of Venice inquired as to how the Serene Republic was to respond to the threat of the Turks with a depleted treasury and a decline in the production of war galleys. A shot from a harquebus could not have broken the din of angry voices that rang in the hall for hours. Within the colourful crowd were three distinct merchant bankers. At the forefront stood a man by the name of Marco di Cassini, a wealthy private financier from Perinaldo, Italy, and an ancestral relative of the future astronomer Giovanni Domenico Cassini. Quiet and composed, he listened to the many arguments of the council, with his hands folded in front of him and his head peered downward, admiring the family ring upon his finger. Standing behind him, in a similar courtly manner, was a Venetian native, Alessio Candiano, and the Florentine, Micheletto d'Angelo. "Plead, if we may," whispered Alessio to Micheletto, "but the sun will have taken up its slumber, and not a single ducat will be gained." "It is an excellent ruse in play by the Signoria," returned Micheletto. "The economy reeks with such an appalling crisis that no promise can be made to the arsenal financiers as to whether they will ever see returns on their investments. All they can do is simply flatter us out the door, or, in a clever manner, persuade the merchants to purchase war bonds for the purpose of amassing a fleet for the relief of Dalmatia to the east. It is pitiful, a devious ploy that somehow makes begging appear noble," laughed Alessio. The sun was now sinking behind the Lido, and the council acknowledged the merchants' arguments, though nothing was gained from it, as Micheletto said. They convened, having obtained nothing but empty promises, and only with some renewed hopes from the war front did the Signoria manage to hold sway. The congregation dispersed from the hall and out onto the stone courtyard of the piazza, screeching loud with many gulls. "Signoria Francesco!" roared Marco's baritone across the piazza as he beckoned to a certain friend and business associate among the tribunals. Francesco Salvo was his full name. He was a frequent borrower of Marco's monies for business ventures and pilgrimages, papal homages, and so forth. He was just turning out of the basilica, wearing his scarlet garb and corno, when he caught ear of that familiar voice. "What has been said is said, Signor Marco," answered Francesco, as he predicted the discussion that was about to unfold, refusing to debate it any further. He was busy fumbling through a collection of parchments tucked underneath his arm as he kept up a hurried stride. "Your response to the mere greeting of an old friend appears as cold as the hearts of your counterparts," said Marco, as he drew up alongside him. "Or is it simply the quaking nature of a man fearfully overdue on his debt?" "Very well, greetings, signor," said Francesco, as he restrained his resistant feet and faced Marco. "And as for your money, I have not forgotten. And to your graceful lenience, I thank you for the use of such. I will make an oath that you will see your money in full at the end of the 4th month. Your witnesses are at your side. It is the threat of the Turks marching on Euboea that is the cause for my delay. I have never entertained the thought of violating our contract. The industry of Venice is under siege. Everyone is bankrupt. However, once the Muda returns from Alexandria this winter, I expect half of the value in spices from my investment in the timber shipment. The other half is still bound in the trade between Bristol and Flanders and the Rhine enterprise, and I expect to receive the returns of such on the 4th month." "I have been in Venice for 3 weeks now," said Marco, "and have not 4 months to sit and dally and wait for my money. Once the winter fair is over, I will be leaving Venice for good. Given the Republic's sore condition, and yours, as I now behold, I am willing to deal with you in mercy once more, and if you agree to my terms, I will deduct the value from your previous loan." He then glanced right and left with caution. "I ask only that you seal an overseas contract with me for a voyage west to Gibraltar. My bank is seeking investments in the Portuguese spice trade around Africa to Malacca. Once my commercial enterprise is underway, you will receive your capital back, as well as a share of the profits upon which you can rid yourself of your debts once and for all." Francesco took Marco by the arm and walked away from the crowd. "Apart from your frequent incorporation of the crime of usury," he said, "I would dare say that treason is a darker debt. Notwithstanding, I am a member of the Signoria. What madness has taken hold of you?" "Perception," said Marco. "Not once, not twice, but thrice and thrice more has my honourable credit served the Republic, and in return I am offered its silent disdain. Insurance is not usury. The rate doubles upon each new loan as the debtor's credit cripples. Call it what you may, but if the Republic will see me no more, and hold me, not in honour, according to its charter, then I will pursue my course of business elsewhere, and leave them to lick the boots of the Sultan when he arrives." "As a friend, I beg you to refrain from such a course of aiding the enterprise of our enemies," said Francesco. "And once again, I ask you to grant me immunity. Retain your loyalty to the enterprise, and I will, upon the watery grave of my father, swear that your money will be delivered in full in 4 months' time, as well as the imposed fine of 200 ducats. As an official of the Republic, I cannot place my name upon any document funding a foreign maritime." The golden sun was lowering, descending upon the rippling currents of the Canale di San Marco, reflecting Giudecca Island in a dusky capsule of light, far behind the 2 freestanding columns of San Marco and San Todaro, which vista always served to enthrall the romantics. A boiling rage poisoned Marco's face as he stood gazing off into the West Sea. Arguments with borrowers and bankers had proven fruitless. "If I do not see you in court," said Marco at length, "then your debt I will settle with the Sultan when the Doge's palace becomes his harem, and the sacred Torcello is set ablaze, and the lion of the holy patron St. Mark is cast down to ruin. And you and your empty robes of whom you deem holy lawgivers will be nothing more than tributaries of his empire, subject to his jizya in what form pleases him." So saying, Marco adjusted his clothes to greet the respect of the public eye, and turned out across the crowded piazza, trailed close behind by Alessio and Micheletto. "Do not let this break our friendship, Marco," said Francesco. "The law is the law. I cannot rewrite it." "I bid you farewell, signor," replied Marco, and then he went away. He vented his anger as he breezed along the wharf, cursing the Venetians for their treachery and denouncing Venice as the whore of the sea, and he even flirted with the thought of lynching Francesco with the silver crucifix that he wore around his neck. "That pig and his congress of sucklings have robbed me for the last time," said Marco as he furthered his animosity. "Had it not been for my money, he would have been forced to prostitute himself to the Bardi family." "Then let him reap the penalty of a whore," said Micheletto. "There are always men who are looking for hire in desperate times. Venetians would be willing to sell their soul to the devil if it meant forming an enterprise with him, meaning no disrespect, Signor Alessio, remembering the native birth of his comrade. "Pray, don't mention it," said Alessio. "Loyalty and respect are owed to the divine law of Venice, not to her sham tribunals who service the bordellos." "Well said," added Marco. "But if you are in truth suggesting violence against a serene tribunal, Micheletto, then it would seem you have already made the deal with the devil. I could take the matter to court before the Council of 40, but such a hearing would not be assembled for weeks, and I am spent on honorable pleas. I do, however, manage to align myself with financiers on both sides of the trade, and there is one who dwells just upstream in San Polo, and that is where we are going." The three of them turned out onto the pier, where stood a gondolier in his gondola, wearing a black cloak and hat, with his long oar clasped in his hand, anxiously awaiting business. Marco shuffled a silver grosso from his pocket and paid the gondolier to row them up the canal. The gondolier drove the oar into the gurgling water and pushed away from the pier, and the boat glided and teetered up the snaking canal. It wasn't long before they neared the boat bridge next to the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, a three-tiered building lined with mullioned windows, built with white Istrian stone and cradling an inner courtyard. This was the residence of the German merchants who bought and sold with Venice. Stevedores were all about near the warehouse, arranging and organizing newly purchased spices after the garblers had sifted them and the notaries recorded the value. Upon the portico stood a congregation of Nuremberg merchants. They were easily distinguished by their enormous black coats, trimmed with white fur, and hats of a similar make, sprouting white, feathery crests. All the merchants had beautiful locks of hair, some golden and some dark, which draped down to their shoulders, and they kept well-trimmed beards. They were conversing and reasoning with each other as they discussed the value of their ready shipments that were being prepared for transport up the Rhine. "This is far enough, signor," said Marco to the gondolier, who then turned the boat and drove it toward the quay. Marco sprang onto the wharf. Alessio and Micheletto followed. "Am I to understand that you have made deals with the Germans?" inquired Alessio as he brushed off the dust from the front of his coat. "Not I," answered Marco, "but Signor Federico has, and since I do not see him with the stevedores, or in company with our well-dressed friends at the Fondaco, then he is undoubtedly at rest in his casa, which is just across the bridge in the Sesteri of San Polo." And so they set off over the bridge towards San Polo. They pushed their way through the cultural crowds of the ill-scented fish market, where there were Moors, Hungarians, Greeks, and Albanians alike. Most of the Greeks, Albanians, and Hungarians were refugees who had been displaced by the Turks, and some were so impoverished that they took every opportunity to clamour for alms before men of means who passed through the Sesteri. Women held out old baskets with hopeful eyes, and thieving children snatched at pockets or dangling jewellery. Such audacity was only rewarded with aggression by the wealthy merchants, who vehemently drove away or rejected the filth of the plebeian foreigners who always thronged along the quays and nestled in the city's darkest corners. The casa was at length located. Its lower register was of red brick, and its upper register was of Istrian stone. It had 4 west-facing windows, affixed with heavy wooden shutters, and hanging baskets of flowers drooped below them. Upon a plaque above the door was a scrawled inscription which read, "Ca Federico." Marco dealt a strong rap on the door. "Federico! Signor Federico!" he shouted in a commanding voice. No one answered. "Apparently he is gone," sighed Alessio. "No, he is drunk," said Marco. "Federico always drinks himself senseless during the Muda season." While waiting impatiently, as Marco beat the door still more, Micheletto's wandering attention was attracted to a candle girl, who were prostitutes, easily identified by the yellow scarves they wore around their necks. She stood amid the bypassers across the street opposite the Ca' Federico. She was attempting to seduce him with her pale complexion, her black-ringed eyes, and her coal-black locks of hair which veiled her face. She wore an appealing scarlet gown which revealed her milky white shoulders and cleavage, and which was puffed at the elbows, but fearfully muddy and torn at the hem. She was a former slave girl of Slavic origin who was sold at a very young age. Her native name was forsaken, and she had been given the Italian name of Antonella, which her master thought had an appealing chime to it. But now she worked on her own volition after becoming disbanded. Her master lost his life in some nameless sea battle against the Pasha. She was only 19 years old. Micheletto had encountered her many times in Venice, but took no interest in her. He thought her a repulsive child. He had no time aside from business to partake of her services, and many merchants were very cautious about contracting sexual diseases in the Mediterranean islands. He too had suffered a form of slavery, or so he chose to characterize it as such, and so felt no empathy for the poor woman. "Lower your eyes, you dreadful dog," railed Micheletto. "The sun is still on the horizon, and you are beyond your lawful boundary, whore. Now go on, get out of here, unless you want to be flogged." "Who are you talking to?" asked Marco, with a curious glance. "The candle girl, the Slavic one who always prowls San Polo," said Micheletto. "Move along, whore," joined Marco. "We have no desire to partake of your foul diseases. Away with you, go!" The woman became frightened and fled away back into the alleys and vanished. Marco then turned and was about to crack the door with his fist again when Federico finally flung it open. His eyes were bloodshot, his curly black hair was uncombed, his white shirt was wrinkled, untucked, and wine-stained. "Savono or Nebbiolo?" asked Marco. "Nebbiolo, of course," said Federico. "I do not drink Genoese wine. I am quite certain, however, that after these many months you have not come to inquire about my preference in wine. Come on in, signor, make yourself at home." He then staggered back into his casa. Marco, Micheletto, and Alessio showed themselves in. They passed into the drawing-room, where upon the table was set a charcuterie board arranged with an assortment of cheeses, grapes, and carved meats, with used cutlery propped nearby. 3 empty wine bottles lay dripping upon it. Federico's quarters were a fearful mess. Crinkled letters and documents were strewn across the floor and table, and he wobbled, tip-topsy over and around them, still under the influence of the alcohol. Blundering out of his bedchamber came a delectable prostitute. Her dark hair was hiding a bashful, though insincere, smile. She lowered her gaze and hastily passed by the 3 guests toward the door, still naked, with her unfitted clothes held around her privy parts, revealing only her smooth, slender legs and a sensuous back, fine as golden silk. Federico grinned and raised a chalice to her as she exited the casa. "Just keeping everyone in business," he said to Marco, with a laugh of satisfaction. Marco smiled deviously. "At least she is prettier than your usual pickings," he said. "I see you are settling in for the trading season." "So I thought," answered Federico, "until the Pasha decided to ravage the ports of Istria. Please, sit. I have plenty of well-aged wine stocked away," as he started perusing through his cabinets. "I also have some fresh cooked meat, gazelle, I believe it is called by the Africans, recently imported from Alexandria." "A little wine will suffice," said Marco, as he and his companions made themselves comfortable. "Venice has become mad with fear following the Sultan's campaign in Euboea," said Federico. "Of course, it has only grown worse with the loss of Negroponte. Word has it that the Sultan has set his sights on Scutari, our last trading post in Albania. Venice will soon be no more than a stepping stone in the midst of it all. I regret speaking so, but I think this is going to be the last muda that I hope to benefit from." "You are a luckier man than I," said Marco. "The case for my profits has proved fruitless, and my borrowers like to think it my privilege to do business with them. I don't think I will ever see returns on my arsenal bonds, with the Pasha ever so elusive on the seas, and it does no good to sell them. No one is buying." "What of the Corantia?" asked Federico. "Have you taken up the matter with them?" "The Signoria would prosecute itself," laughed Marco. "Even the Council of 40 cannot give me a court order of recompense in this economy, but only ask for more, as they have done. That being said, I thought my fortune would rest with Signoria Francesco, who is chiefest among my private borrowers, overdue on loans. Well, was I a fool to hold him in such respect in regards to fairness?" "Francesco," cackled Federico. "That poor fool knows only debt. I will bet my life that you will never see any return on such loans. Is this why you have now come seeking me, Signor Marco?" "To borrow money? No. But to do business? Yes," said Marco. "As you are well aware by now, I need money. Funds, to be precise, for a voyage of commerce to seek my fortune elsewhere. And you, my friend, are in similar straits. You have no assurance that the Muda will return well stocked with spices and silks, unpillaged by Turkish galleys. The Republic alone cannot even begin to attempt a campaign against the Sultan. Yes, we have some galleys, but no, we do not have the money for the war effort. How long can we attempt to raise an annual sum of 1,000,000 or more ducats? And as pertaining to resources, the Turks will outlast us. The Levant is under the Sultan's control, and very soon all of Italy will be too, and it is they who supply us. The Sultan has loyal soldiers who fight for him, for their god and their country, and what do we have? A mere handful of feckless merchants, artisans, and craftsmen who pride themselves as skilled galleymen, but are much like the condottieri who will just as soon serve the Sultan if he offers them a stronger coin. And how many bailos must be sent to the court of Mehmet to negotiate peace, only to have them decapitated or left to rot in a Turkish dungeon? "I have a feeling this argument is approaching a grave finale," said Federico. "What are you implying?" "I am simply saying that the fate of Venice is sealed," said Marco, "and our bonds will bring us nothing. We can either sit here, indulge in more women and wine at the Rialto, while we await the sight of the Pasha's fleet appearing over the western horizon, with their crescent banners waving proudly in the wind, and then have our heads, if we are so fortunate as to escape being flayed alive, fastened on pikes or to the prows of his ships. Or we can commandeer our money's worth and make our flight away from the Turkish front once the winter fair is over." "And how is this to be achieved?" inquired Federico. "There will be shipments of spices and other commodities of value at the Fondaco dei Tedeschi when the Muda returns," said Marco. "I have heard from a certain business associate that the Germans are calculated to receive a value of 20,000 ducats worth from their shipments. The merchandise will then be inspected, sorted, and prepared immediately to be exported up the Rhine Valley. Fondacos are always a convenient target, as they are subject to foreign industries, their ever-changing laws, as well as tax inflation. Francesco is invested in the Rhine trade, and he estimates that he will collect his returns in 4 months, which returns he has promised to me, or so this is his claim. I, however, will not take the risk. I will seize what I am rightfully entitled to and barter it elsewhere. As for you, Signor Federico, I need Lovro's smugglers to aid me in this undertaking when I am ready, and whatever is stolen that exceeds my desired price will be yours. And in addition to your share, I will pay an insurance of 400 ducats. 400 ducats, said Federico. A fair gift for a man desperate to acquire funding. Once the spices are stolen away, I will have all I need, said Marco. More than enough to compensate you and Lovro smugglers." "This seems foolish," said Federico. "How many units of spices do you intend on smuggling away?" "At least 2,000 ducats worth," said Marco. "Enough to barter with my Catalan friends in Sicily. I will simply raise the price to the Alexandrian rate of 160 drachmas per unit, which will then be enough to furnish me to Gibraltar." 2,000 ducats worth!" exclaimed Federico. "You are mad. Look out this window," as he walked over and parted the shutters. "Look beyond at the Grand Canal. It is flowing with watercraft. There are noblemen, foreign merchants, diplomats coming and going at every turn, and yes, the condottieri, mercenaries who night and day prowl the wharves and canals. And do not forget the wonderful Venetian system of citizen informers who report treachery daily, if not hourly. How do you intend on smuggling that much spices and remain undetected?" "I am aware of the risks," said Marco, "and I don't need to worry, as I will be departing Venice indefinitely after the Muda returns. The heist will be quick and without consequence. As soon as the Ottomans overrun the Republic and erase its memory, such will erase the memory of my crime as well. Now, I need your services. Send word to your man Lovro and tell him of my offer." "The danger will be too great," said Federico. "I have secured good trading relations in Venice, and I am trusted by the guilds, and they of me." "I can assure you," said Marco, "that if the Doge cannot repel the Sultan's forces, I do not think the merchant guilds can." Marco then rose from his chair. "Thank you for the wine, signor. I must check in at the Porta Magna and see that the caulking on my ship has been completed to my liking." "Suppose I accept your offer," said Federico. "Are you willing to accommodate my desired rate?" "When the winter fair is over," said Marco, "and I am assured of your commitment to my plan, and Lovro as well, only then will I negotiate the rate." Marco then fastened on his shiny leather gloves, put on his hat, and turned out of the casa.